So fellas, we're going to take a look at the top 15 pound for pound list, go through every fighter and pick out the worst stylistic matchup for every single top 15 pound for pound fighter in the UFC. Starting off with Ilia Topuria himself at number 1. I think the worst matchup that's, and obviously a realistic matchup that I think will be the worst stylistic one for Topuria would be Islam Makhachev himself. The super fight, Topuria versus Makhachev. Now at 155, I don't see anybody beating Topuria. He's knocked out Oliveira with ease. He knocked out Holloway with ease back at 145 as well. The only possible matchups I can see going down next is Gaethje, Paddy and Tsarukyan next for Ilia Topuria. Gaethje's probably the easiest fight he could have possibly made for Ilia Topuria. He gets chinned by Topuria easily. Paddy Pimblett, I guess it's a new style, still probably gets chinned by Topuria though because of his striking. Tsarukyan I see being a genuine threat, and that's because of the wrestling, but I don't see how Tsarukyan poses a bigger threat than somebody like Islam Makhachev does. And on top of that as well, if Topuria versus Makhachev goes down, it's going to be in the welterweight division because Makhachev ain't moving back down to 155. And Makhachev's a big guy at 155. I imagine Makhachev would absolutely tower over Ilia Topuria at 170. He's obviously got the wrestling threat, like I said, that somebody like Tsarukyan presents, and he's arguably a better wrestler than Tsarukyan. He's also got the submission threat as well. I'd say he's a lot more dangerous on the ground than anybody that Topuria has ever faced, especially Tsarukyan. He's more dangerous on the ground than Tsarukyan. And the striking of Islam Makhachev as well. Don't get me wrong, he's nowhere near on the level of, Topuria on the feet, but he's still probably one of the best strikers he would have faced. And he's a better striker than somebody like Oliveira as well. So he's the only man I can see beating Topuria. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Islam would definitely beat Topuria. I'm not saying that would be how the fight goes. I still have confidence in Topuria, but stylistically, moving up a weight class against pound for pound number 2 in the UFC, a guy that can wrestle, a guy that can submit, a guy that can strike, I think Makhachev would stylistically be the worst matchup that's possible for Topuria right now that I could see going down. So of all the possible matchups on the table, I think Makhachev, even though Topuria can still win this one because he's just that damn fucking good, I think Makhachev's the worst matchup. And then for Makhachev himself at number 2, I initially was going to say Ilia Topuria for Makhachev as well, but I'm going to change my answer. And I'm going to go with JDM being the worst matchup for Islam Makhachev. Now, obviously, Makhachev versus Topuria, like I just said, it's a pretty 50-50 fight. They're both terrible fights for each other. Whereas JDM and Makhachev, I've said this before, I'm going to say it again, I think at 170, JDM wins this fight. If this fight does go down, which is probably going to be the next fight for the welterweight belt, Makhachev's moved up, he's probably going to get an immediate title fight. I see JDM winning. He's got way better stand-up than Islam Makhachev. He's got some of the best boxing in the UFC. Great boxer, great combination, just pieced up Belal Muhammad, and he's pieced up pretty much everyone else as well. So I see him, working Makhachev on the feet. And even with the wrestling, now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Belal Muhammad's the same type of wrestler than Makhachev, but we just saw JDM with amazing takedown defense, and we've seen Makhachev before historically struggle with boxers with great takedown defense, like when he faced Volkanovski, a 145-pound Volkanovski moving up to lightweight, where he massively struggled with Volkanovski. And even Dustin Poirier, I know he didn't necessarily struggle with Poirier, but Poirier made it to round 5, made it a bit of a scrap. So it seems like boxers with good takedown defense seem to be a problem for Makhachev. So JDM, who's undefeated in the UFC, great takedown defense and great grappling with amazing boxing, probably one of the best in the UFC, and at the size of 170, I think he's probably the toughest matchup for Makhachev. Again, I'm not saying JDM wipes the floor with Makhachev. I just think because of the size, because of his boxing, and because of how well-rounded he is, I think JDM would be the worst stylistic matchup for Makhachev. And to be honest, I'm leaning towards JDM winning the fight when they do get announced. So for Islam Makhachev, I'm going to say that JDM is the worst stylistic matchup. Then for Merab, I'm going to say for Merab, it's a guy that he's beaten before because he has kind of lapped the division. I'm going to say Arman Tsarukyan. It's probably the worst matchup from Merab. Now, like I said, we've seen this fight before. We saw it in January of this year. Merab ended up winning the fight. But even though Merab won the fight, it was still a very close one. Earlier in the fight, Umar got going with wrestling. He's been the only guy in the UFC so far that's really been able to kind of present problems, at least in his title run, with wrestling to Merab. But even on the feet as well, Umar, better striker than Merab. I know there wasn't too many striking exchanges, but on the feet, he did seem to be winning the exchanges early on. And you've got to remember as well, Umar's so green in his UFC career. At the time of facing Merab, he only had one ranked opponent. He was green in his UFC career, no good wins. His only good win was Corey Sandhagen, and then he went straight to the final boss in Merab, and still made it a close competitive fight where you can argue that Umar could have won that fight, even though I definitely thought Merab should have got the job done. And outside of that, there's not really any other major threats to Merab. I mean, you've got Corey Sandhagen coming up, but I feel like Sandhagen's going to get out wrestled. Apart from that, everybody else has been beaten dominantly by Merab. So I think it's possible that we do see a rematch, at least in the next year or year and a half, between Umar and Merab after Umar beats Mario Batista. And I think Umar's only got the higher chance of winning as time goes on. He's only going to get more experience. He's only going to get a better 5-round pace. His stand-up's only going to get sharper too. So even though Merab's already beat Arman Tsarukyan, it was a close fight. Umar needs the experience, and I still think Umar stylistically is one of the worst fights for Merab in the bantamweight division. I'm not saying Umar's going to beat him in the future because Merab's beaten him not comfortable, but Merab's definitely beaten him before, but I think it's probably the worst stylistic matchup. Then for Khamzat Chimaev, the most recent champion in the UFC, I think the worst matchup for Chimaev. Now, don't get me wrong, I think Chimaev beats everybody at middleweight right now. I don't think the guy to beat Chimaev exists, but I do think the worst matchup is probably Fluffy Hernandez. I'm going to go Fluffy Hernandez being the worst matchup for Khamzat Chimaev. Now, obviously, Chimaev's game is mauling people with the wrestling. He's definitely the best wrestler in the division right now. Just mauled Dricus Du Plessis across 25 minutes in one of the most dominating performances. But I see Hernandez being the biggest threat. Out of the 4 big threats in Imavov, Baralo, Hernandez, and Derrida, I think Hernandez is the only guy that genuinely has a chance. I'm not saying he definitely does, or I'm not saying I'd favour him, but the only guy that has a genuine chance of beating him, and that's because he's definitely one of the best wrestlers in this division too. Hernandez is one of the best paced fighters, absolutely mauls everybody with the wrestling. He might not be as fast starting, he might not be as highlight reel-esque as somebody like Khamzat Chimaev, but his wrestling is some of the best in this division. Absolutely fucking mauls everybody with the wrestling. His submission ability, his ability to go from ground and pound to submission to just wear people out, and the stamina as well. Chimaev's historically had bad stamina. I know he just went 25 minutes with DDP, but historically, he's known for having bad stamina. Hernandez doesn't only have probably the best stamina at middleweight, he's got some of the best in the UFC right now. Chimaev's got average striking, so does Hernandez. Their striking's on a similar level. I could see Hernandez genuinely dragging Khamzat into deep waters, where Khamzat lil bros him in the first couple of rounds, but in those last 2 or 3 rounds, because of the pace that Hernandez pushes, I can see him really making it a problem for Khamzat Chimaev. Again, I think Chimaev beats everybody at middleweight right now, but just because of the style of Hernandez, he's the only guy that can really compete with Chimaev at wrestling, and he's got such a good 5-round pace, and he's so durable. And we've seen him against dangerous grapplers before in likes of Rodolfo Vieira. I think Hernandez is probably the toughest fight for Chimaev. And I do think we will see this title fight eventually after Hernandez beats Derrida. So for Chimaev, I'm going to say Anthony Fluffy Hernandez, worst matchup. Then for Pantoja, criminally underrated on the pound-for-pound list. I mean, I guess he's got his respect now because he's in the top 5, but still. For Pantoja, I'm going to say the toughest fight is probably going to be his next fight in Joshua Van. Yeah, this is going to be the next fight at flyweight, or at least it should be. They're faced off. It's going to be next. Joshua Van getting his title fight. And you look at the flyweight division, similar to Merab. He's cleared out the division. He's beat Moreno 3 times. He's beat Royval twice. He's beat Kara France. He's beat Manel Cap. He's beat Alex Press. He's already lapped the division. And for most of the time, he's dominated most of them too. Like I said, beating the likes of Moreno 3 times. And he's winning. He's looks unstoppable right now, just Pantoja, but I do genuinely think that Joshua Van is the toughest test at flyweight right now. First reason, he's got better striking. I think if this was purely to take place on the feet, Joshua Van pieces the fuck out of Pantoja. He's pieced up everybody apart from Charles Johnson on the feet so far. Pieced up, I mean, it was a bit of a back and forth fight, but was winning the exchanges on the feet against Brandon Royval, where he showed an amazing 3-round pace. He's one of the best, if not the best, well, he's definitely the best boxer, but he's one of the best strikers. Honestly, in the UFC right now, his pace across 15 minutes with the boxing, and Pantoja, I mean, he's got a very scrappy style on the feet, but he's not particularly got great defense. He's not known for his stand-up. And 2, Joshua Van's got great takedown defense. I know we've not really seen him against any heavy grapplers so far, but from what we've seen, Joshua Van has been able to keep the fight on the feet most times. We saw it in the fight with Ray Saruya, where Ray Saruya shot about 50 takedowns and only got about 3 of them. In his fight with Cody Durden, Joshua Van's evidently got good takedown defense. We've never really seen him struggle with the wrestling before, and he's just come off a career best win and he's beat Brandon Royval. So I do think Joshua Van really has a good chance of beating Pantoja. And you're going to remember as well, Joshua Van's 23 years old. He's so young. He's looked good in all of his fights so far. Just had an amazing win over Brandon Royval. I could see Joshua Van keeping this fight standing and just picking apart Pantoja across 25 minutes, making it a dogfight, but ultimately winning that dogfight with Pantoja. So I'm going to say Joshua Van not only has a chance, but I think he's got a really good chance of beating Pantoja. And I honestly don't think he should be that big of an underdog if they or when they do fight. So for Pantoja, I'm going to say his next fight in Joshua Van is the worst matchup. And then for Volkanovski, a lot of options for Volkanovski at featherweight right now, but I think the worst matchup for Volk is probably going to be Gene Silva. Now, don't get me wrong, Volkanovski's the most technical featherweight right now, and that's why I think he beats the likes of Leroy Murphy, Arnold Allen, and Yair Rodriguez again, guys that have more of a technical approach to things, because I just think Volkanovski would out-technique them. I think to beat Volkanovski, evidently, it's going to take someone, you know, who hits hard, and he's a bit of a KO artist, like somebody like Topuria, or like Makhachev at 155, who obviously hits like a truck in that division, and that's why I've said Gene Silva, because Gene Silva is probably the most dangerous up-and-coming featherweight right now. He's kind of got that touch of death that a lot of fighting nerds have. Maybe not the touch of death, but just his ability to find the KO shot. He's unseen at featherweight. He's fought many good strikers before. He's knocked them out before. And for that reason, I think if Gene Silva can clip the chin of Volkanovski, which in a 25-minute fight I think he's going to be able to do, I think he knocks out Volkanovski. And you look at his record as well, undefeated in the UFC, the vast majority, well, all of them being finishes as well, most of them being KOs. So I'm going to say Gene Silva's the worst fight for Volkanovski. Volk's more experienced, he's a better wrestler, and he's more more technical than Gene Silva, but just because of the power that Gene Silva has and his ability to fan that KO shot. And now that Volkanovski's getting up there in age, and again, it's still a question of how good his chin is. I think across 25 minutes, Gene Silva would find the chin of Volkanovski and knock him out. So I think to beat Volkanovski, it's going to take a power puncher like Gene Silva, not a technical guy like an Arnold Allen or Lerone Murphy, someone who hits like a truck. So I'm going to say Gene Silva probably knocks out Volkanovski. And then for Magomed Ankalaev, obviously got the rematch booked against Pereira, but I'm actually going to say for Ankalaev, the worst matchup, it's probably someone weird like Yuri Prohaska. And I say that because Ankalaev, I mean, you look at his wins at 205 so far, all of them tend to be technical strikers, and technical strikers don't work when you're facing Ankalaev. Yuri's way too crafty, in my opinion. He's not going to stand there and make it a technical chess match with Ankalaev. He's going to make it autistic. He's going to make it weird. He's going to make it crafty like he does in every single one of his fights. And I think that would really work against Ankalaev. I reckon he'd rough Ankalaev up on the feet, make it gritty, make it, like I said, an unpretty fight, and absolutely rough Ankalaev up on the feet, like we kind of saw Jan Blachowicz do as well. And because of how dangerous Yuri is and the fact that he did look better against Jamal Hill, I think the striking of Yuri would come into play. And he's grappling as well. He's probably one of the better grapplers in this division. He's got better grappling than Pereira at least. And I mean, Ankalaev couldn't take down Pereira, so I'm going to go for Yuri against Ankalaev. I can see a world where Ankalaev somehow knocks out Yuri because Yuri's very weird, and Ankalaev, you know, was KO'd the likes of Johnny Walker before, but again, we're kind of reaching with Johnny Walker, but I just think because of how weird Yuri is on the feet, the fact that he's still improving, and because of his takedown defense generally, and the fact that it would make it a gritty dogfight, I could see him roughing up Ankalaev and winning a pretty comfortable points decision. So I'm going to say for, Magomed Ankalaev, I think Yuri Prohaska would probably be the worst stylistic matchup for him. And then for JDM, I kind of had to think about JDM. I was initially going to say Makhachev, but I don't think it makes sense with Makhachev being JDM's toughest test and then JDM being Makhachev's toughest test. So for JDM, I'm going to pull this one out of a hat a bit. I'm going to say that Carlos Prates is probably the worst matchup for JDM, and you're kind of going to hear me out with this one. Don't get me wrong, JDM is a better fighter than Carlos Prates, and he's probably going to do more in the division than Prates is. But I feel like Prates, he's kind of one of those fighters with a touch of death like Alex Pereira, where he's way too dangerous on the feet. Not only is he one of the best Muay Thai strikers in this division right now, his kickboxing, his ability to find the shot, like I said, coming from the Fighting Nerds, he hits like a fucking truck. I've never seen anybody flatline Neil Magny or Jeff Neal in the way that he has. He's always got that KO power that no other welterweight really has, the hardest dude in the division, and he must be one of the most tough strikers to beat. Great Muay Thai, tied with the power that he has. He's super dangerous, and people are going to bring up the Gary fight saying, oh, if he can't beat Gary, how is he going to beat JDM? Gary's way more rangy than JDM. JDM technically fights in the pocket. Gary's way more rangy, and he still nearly got finished in the 5th round against Carlos Prates. So I'm going to say Prates is the worst matchup for JDM. Prates has never really struggled with grappling. I don't see JDM's grappling really coming into test. I see it being a striking matchup, but even though you can argue that, you know, JDM's the more technical striker, Prates is still one of the trickiest tests on the feet, and he's way more dangerous striking than JDM. And you never know, if he can find that one shot on JDM, he could knock him out. So I'm going to say Carlos Prates as being the worst matchup. I think JDM genuinely is one of the toughest fights for everybody in the division. He's a terrible fight, but I think it's going to take someone dangerous on the feet like Prates who can find the shot to beat JDM. So might be a bit of a hot take, but I'm going to say Carlos Prates being the worst fight for JDM. And then for Tom Aspinall, I'm going to say for Tom Aspinall, the worst matchup in this division right now would be Alexander Volkov. Now, we have seen this fight before. We saw it a couple of years ago in 2022, and Aspinall submitted him. And to be fair, he made it look easy. But you look at the 3 big threats for Tom Aspinall in this division right now. Cyril Gane, he can't wrestle. He's going to get submitted. Jailton Almeida can't strike. Aspinall will keep the fight standing and knock him out. So I think he's going to take somebody like Alexander Volkov to beat Tom Aspinall. Volkov is one of the more well-rounded dudes in this division. He can grapple. Again, not one of the best wrestlers, but we saw it a bit in the Tatu Vivaza fight. We saw it a bit in the fight with Cyril Gane. He can wrestle as Volkov, and he's definitely improved it over his past couple of fights. And he's striking too. He's this 6'7" Russian beast with amazing striking. I'd say he outstruck Cyril Gane on the feet, and he should be on a 5-fight winning streak now as well. He should be on a 5-fight winning streak. I thought he definitely beat Cyril Gane in that matchup, and for that reason, I think he'd be the worst matchup for Aspinall. Now, don't get me wrong. If there were betting odds on this fight, I fully expect Aspinall by 1st round finish to be, you know, the leading bet, because Aspinall's just so far ahead of the division. But Volkov, in my opinion, is just the most well-rounded dude, and I think this 5-fight winning streak, or at least what should have been a 5-fight winning streak that he's put together, he's only kind of, in my opinion, in my books, increase the chances of him beating Tom Aspinall more. So if he does beat Jailton Almeida and that fight between Aspinall and Volkov does get made, I think this new version of Volkov could genuinely be a big threat to Tom Aspinall. Great striker, probably the best in the division right now. Also tied with great wrestling. I'd still favour Aspinall to win by finish, but I think stylistically, Volkov would be the worst matchup. And then for Alex Pereira, I mean, it's pretty evident the worst matchup for Pereira is Ankalaev, and I mean, it's because we've just seen this fight. We saw this fight earlier this year, UFC 313, and Ankalaev won. Now, we didn't do it in super dominant fashion. It was a lot of cage holding, but even on the feet, Ankalaev was looking sharp. Pereira was a bit hesitant on the feet. Ankalaev was able to get going on the feet quite a bit, and Ankalaev ended up beating Alex Pereira. And I've kind of got to say, for that reason, that Ankalaev's going to be the toughest test again. I mean, you look at 205 right now, Alex beats everyone else, and he has already. He's beat Yuri twice, he's beat Roundtree, he's beat Jan Blachowicz, he's beat Jamal Hill. His resume already at 205 is pretty stacked, is Alex. The only other guy he's yet to beat is Ankalaev, and the fact that Ankalaev's beaten him before, and I'm probably going to favor him to win again, I've got to say that Ankalaev is probably the toughest matchup for Pereira. It's nothing, again, I wouldn't be surprised if Pereira is able to, get going with a striking this time around and knock out Ankalaev. I just think because we've seen this fight before, and Ankalaev's been the only guy to stop him at 205, I therefore have to kind of say that Ankalaev is the worst matchup. So, Ankalaev, worst matchup for Pereira. Then for Dricus Du Plessis, again, similar to what I just said, I mean, we've kind of got to go with Khamzat Chimaev being the most difficult fight for DDP. We saw this fight 2 weeks ago, and Chimaev mauled him across 25 minutes, 50-44 type performance, just completely mauled him with the wrestling across 25 minutes. Might not have damaged him a lot, might not have done too much damage, but the point is he completely mauled him with the wrestling, dominated him, and has been the only guy in the middleweight division, and the only guy in the UFC so far to beat DDP. It was pure domination. I mean, look at the scorecards as well, 50-44 as well. To do it to DDP, look at the run that DDP was on in the UFC to 50-44 that guy. Like, DDP beats everyone by accident. Couldn't beat Khamzat by accident though, so it's got to be Chimaev. Even if there's a guy that you can argue also beats DDP, like a Caio Borralho or something, I don't think anybody's ever going to dominate him in the way that Chimaev did, especially like a 50-44 performance to the reigning middleweight champion. So, worst matchup for DDP, definitely Chimaev. Even if the fight was closer next time around, it's still going to be a pretty clear Chimaev win in my opinion, because of how far ahead he was on the scorecards in the first fight. So, Dricus Du Plessis, worst matchup, probably and evidently has to be Chimaev. And then for Max Holloway, I mean, we're starting to see a bit of a theme. The worst fight for Holloway, it's got to be Topuria again. Now, we've seen this fight before, obviously, UFC 308 last October, and Topuria became the first man to knock out Holloway. We've seen this fight before, and again, evidently, Topuria has to be the worst matchup considering he's slept Volkanovski, slept Holloway before. Now, to be fair, people would argue that Holloway at 155 is a different type of fighter because he's absolutely beat the crap out of Justin Gaethje, knocked him out, and he had an amazing performance over Dustin Poirier. So, don't get me wrong, Holloway at 155 is different to 145. But that still don't change it. I think Topuria knocks him out anyway. Topuria's also looked good at 155. You look at the division right now, the big threats to Holloway. He's already knocked out Justin Gaethje. He's already demolished, when he would demolish Charles Oliveira, in my opinion, if they were to fight. He probably loses to Tsarukyan, but I think he could be quite competitive. We've seen the fight with Topuria before, and I think even if they were to rematch at 155 where Holloway's more comfortable, I see the fight going the same way. Ilia Topuria by KO. So for Holloway, I think his kryptonite at both 145, 155, whatever the weight class, it is Ilia Topuria, and I mean, we've seen this before. And then for Belal Muhammad, I think the worst matchup for Belal Muhammad at 170 would probably be Shavkat Rakhmonov. I remember when Belal Muhammad beat Leon and everyone was like, no, Belal definitely beat Shavkat. Now I'm getting back on the Shavkat hype train and saying that he's the worst matchup for Belal Muhammad. And I just think he's simply better everywhere the fight goes. Better striker than Belal Muhammad. I think that Shavkat, don't get me wrong, not one of the best strikers in the division, but still quite crafty. And he's definitely got better striking than Belal Muhammad. The wrestling of Shavkat, I wouldn't say he's better than Belal's, but you can argue that it's at a similar level to Belal Muhammad. And he's just simply way more dangerous on the ground than Belal Muhammad with his submission ability. I mean, the guy's only had one decision out of like 20 wins. Every other one was by finish. Equal wrestling. I think the wrestling between Belal and Shavkat would be fairly even, but Belal Muhammad's got worse striking than Shavkat. I think Shavkat picks him apart on the feet, and he's got worse submission ability. If anybody's going to get a finish in this fight, it's going to be Shavkat. And people might argue that, Belal Muhammad was able, Ian Garry was able to kind of showcase a bit of grappling against Shavkat Rakhmonov. That's true, but I think that was a different matchup for Shavkat, and on top of that, he was dealing with an injury in that fight. So I'm going to go with Shavkat Rakhmonov being the worst matchup for Belal Muhammad, keeps the fight standing, roughs him up on the feet, and if anybody's going to get a finish, it is going to be Shavkat Rakhmonov. I still think it'd be competitive, don't get me wrong, because Belal Muhammad is only taken one loss to the current champion recently, but I'm going to say Shavkat being the toughest test for Belal Muhammad. And then for Arman Tsarukyan, I think the worst fight for Tsarukyan is going to be Islam Makhachev. Tsarukyan, again, one of the better wrestlers at 155. Probably the only top wrestler apart from Gamrot right now at 155. He's one of the best wrestlers in the division. Super athletic as well on the feet is Arman Tsarukyan too. And he probably beats everyone in this division apart from maybe Topuria and Makhachev. Now, Topuria, you can use the argument that he's got untested wrestling. So I can see a world where people are picking Tsarukyan to beat Topuria because Topuria's wrestling hasn't been exposed. Tsarukyan's one of the best wrestlers in this division. Whereas Makhachev, there's nothing you can really say. He's got equal wrestling to Tsarukyan. I think Makhachev Makhachev and Tsarukyan's wrestling, based on their first fight and based on their performances after that, have pretty similar wrestling. The only difference is Makhachev's got better striking, way better striking, and he's shown it against better strikers than Tsarukyan, and he's a lot more dangerous than Tsarukyan too. So I have said before, when I did a prediction video for their original fight at UFC 311, that this was going to be competitive, but I just don't see a world where Tsarukyan can beat Makhachev. I can see a world where Tsarukyan beats everybody at 155, including Topuria, just not Makhachev. I think Makhachev's just simply the more well-rounded and better fighter. So I'm going to say the worst fight for Tsarukyan is Islam Makhachev. And then for Shavkat Rakhmonov, I think the worst fight for Shavkat is probably the current champion in JDM. Yeah, I say this because, well, JDM's just simply the better fighter everywhere. The last time we saw a heavy boxer against Shavkat Rakhmonov, he struggled on the feet against somebody like Jeff Neal, and we've simply seen Shavkat Rakhmonov lose to these not lose to these elite strikers, but struggle on the feet specifically against these elite strikers like Jeff Neal and Ian Garry. And we're talking about the best boxer and the best striker in this division right now in JDM. I think he completely roughs up Shavkat on the feet. Shavkat's very hittable, and his defense on the feet is one of these biggest flaws. I think you put him against somebody like JDM can definitely get going on the feet with his boxing and pick apart Shavkat Rakhmonov. And when it comes to grappling, obviously that's Shavkat's bread and butter. He shines in the wrestling, he shines in the submission game. He could definitely be a big submission threat to Jack Della Maddalena. I mean, that's the only chance he has of winning the fight, but we saw his back get taken and easily countered by Ian Garry. And like I said, JDM's got some of the best anti-grappling in this division right now. He had good anti-grappling against Gilbert Burns, good anti-grappling against a guy with wrestling like Belal Muhammad as well. So I just think he doesn't take down Jack in the fight, simply stays standing, and Jack Della Maddalena picks apart Shavkat Rakhmonov. I see it going very similar to the Belal Muhammad fight. Shavkat having his moments, Shavkat taking him down every now and then, but ultimately it is just JDM keeping the distance, roughing up Shavkat on the feet and defending takedowns. So I'm going to say the worst fight for Shavkat Rakhmonov would be the current champion in JDM. But those, in my opinion, are the toughest tests for every fighter in the top 15 right now of the pound for pound list. Let me know if you agree, disagree, if you'd switch anything around. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.